All right, let's get right into it. On the surface, a JSA might just look like a massive stack of compliance paperwork. But today, we're going to translate all that jargon into a practical, real-world roadmap for your survival on site. I mean, we're talking about a daily routine where thousands of kilos of waste, massive hydraulic machinery, and wildly unpredictable environments all collide.
We'll be tracking a day in the life of a truck operator through 6 main stages. We've got the safety foundation, pre-start and transit, engaging the load, navigating height restrictions, the tipping point, and wrapping up with safe shutdown.
So starting with stage 1, the safety foundation, and really understanding the stakes. Before you even think about turning that key, we have to talk about the WHS Act of 2020. We're not talking about avoiding a scratched bumper here. We are talking about making sure everybody gets to go home to their families. When you look at the 5x5 risk assessment matrix, the math is actually pretty sobering. It maps the consequences against the likelihood of an event. If you combine an almost certain likelihood with a catastrophic consequence, which, let's be real, means death, you hit critical risk. That right there is the lens for literally everything you do on site.
And that brings us to an absolute non-negotiable rule. The policy is crystal clear. If a task hits that critical risk level, work stops immediately. Period. There is no pushing through. There's no, oh, just this once to get it done. The entire safety culture of the site rests entirely on the authority of this one rule. You do not proceed.
So how do we bring that massive risk down? Under Section 17 of the Act, we use the hierarchy of controls. You don't just slap on a hard hat and call it a day. First, you try to completely eliminate the hazard. If you can't do that, you substitute it, isolate it, or engineer a fix. Then come the admin rules, and only then, as your absolute last line of defense, do you rely on your personal protective equipment. Moving right along to Section 2, pre-start and transit, or beginning the journey. Okay, getting you safely into the active zones starts with basic qualifications. Putting an unverified driver behind the wheel of a complex front lift compactor, that is a massive, high initial risk. But you verify their heavy rigid or HR license, run them through site inductions, and do a task-specific competency assessment, boom. You've just crushed that high danger down to a perfectly manageable low residual risk. Verified training is literally your first practical control.
All right, so you're qualified. Now you need your armor. We're talking steel cap boots, high-vis gear, safety glasses, a hard hat when you're out of the vehicle, and leather gloves for ground-level bin adjustments. Oh, and here's a massive one. The second you're inside that cab, your seatbelt is mandatory. Zero exceptions, guys. It is the cheapest, most effective control you have.
So you're rolling through the site, keeping it to a max of 5 kph near pedestrians. You're dealing with a lot of complex traffic, but the scariest part? The active train tracks. Ask yourself this. What is your immediate reaction if the absolute worst happens and your engine just dies right in the middle of those rails? Well, if you stall there, you have to act instantly. Refinery trains can sneak up on you silently and way faster than you'd think, making this a true life or death situation. First, get everybody entirely clear of the tracks. Second, get on the radio to the emergency services operator immediately. And third, this is crucial. Do not, under any circumstances, get back into that cab or try to restart the engine until you've gotten the official all clear.
Okay, on to Section 3, engaging the load and securing the bin.
You've survived the drive, and now you have to actually pick up the bin without causing a massive spill. You drive the forks all the way into the bin pockets, but here is your golden rule, the 300mm test lift. You lift the load just a tiny bit, about 300 mils, and you pause. If that bin feels even slightly unbalanced, if it shifts, or if one side is higher than the other, you drop it immediately and try again. That tiny little pause is exactly what prevents a catastrophic load drop from full height later on.
Next up, Section 4, navigating height restrictions and executing the partial lift.
This is where things get really tricky. You've got the forks in, you did your 300mm test lift, but then you look up, and there's a pipe, or some cables, or an awning blocking your clearance. Hitting a structural beam with thousands of kilos of hydraulic force is a recipe for disaster. So how do you maneuver all that weight when the ceiling is literally closing in on you?
The fix is a specific maneuver called the partial lift. It's basically a highly choreographed 4-step dance. You engage the bin on the forks, then raise it just enough to clear the ground, literally the bare minimum. While it's basically hovering, you creep the truck at a near crawl over to a completely clear, safe area. Only then, once you are completely out from under the hazard, do you go ahead and proceed with the full lift.
All right, Section 5, the tipping point, the full, lift, and empty.
This right here is the climax of the whole job, because gravity and physics are actively working against you. When you suspend a massive bin high in the air, your truck's center of gravity shifts drastically upward and forward. That is a super high initial risk for a tip-over. But if you make absolutely sure you're on perfectly firm, flat ground, and you stay completely stationary, you neutralize that risk down to low. Moving a truck with an elevated bin is strictly forbidden. You even have to factor in how wind loading against an open raised bin might throw off your balance.
Which brings us to our final stage, Section 6, safe shutdown at the end of the shift.
The bin is empty, the arms are stowed, but the job isn't done yet because we have to talk about you, the human element. Operating heavy machinery when you're completely exhausted is exactly as dangerous as a mechanical failure. In this JSA, fatigue is flagged as a high-level hazard. You have to follow the site fatigue management plan, take your mandatory breaks, and immediately self-report to your supervisor if you're too impaired to drive safely. You are literally the final safety mechanism.
So, the shift is over, you park on flat ground, drop the lift arms all the way, crank that brake, and log out. But as you head home today, I really want you to think about this. Every single rule we just talked about was written because somebody, somewhere, had to learn it the hard way. Is saving 5 seconds by rushing a partial lift or skipping a test lift ever actually worth the risk of a catastrophic accident? Stay sharp, follow the structure, and let's make sure everybody gets to go home.